Hi, I'm Jamie Lewis, and welcome back to thebassist.net. A couple weeks ago, a video went live here that basically showed you how I do live looping with Ableton rather than using a standard looper pedal, because it allows me to do some things that you just can't do with a normal loop pedal. And since then, many of you have requested a step-by-step tutorial basically on how I did it, on how to set it all up with a bass, with a laptop computer, and some MIDI peripherals, and that's exactly what I'm going to do today. So stick around. I guarantee you're going to want to see this. Now, before we get too far into this, I just need to say really quickly that if you are brand new to the world of digital recording, meaning like you've never used Pro Tools or Logic or Ableton or GarageBand or any of that stuff, then a lot of this is going to go way over your head. I mean, it's not hard to do. If I can do it, anybody can do it. It's really not that difficult, but there's just going to be a lot of technical lingo that might be new to you and it might be tough. So just trying to give you a fair warning, that's all. So I guess the first thing you'll need is a computer. It doesn't have to be a laptop. And it also doesn't have to be an Apple or a Mac. It can be a Windows computer. They're all good these days. So probably whatever computer you already have, it's fine. And then the next thing you'll need is a working copy of Ableton Live. Now, you will need to purchase it, and yes, it is expensive, but there is also a 30-day free trial that you can download from their website. So click on this link that's popping up right there if you don't own Ableton yet. And as far as I know, it's totally 100% functional. Just after 30 days, it stops working. So once you've downloaded Ableton Live and you've installed it on your computer, you'll just need to open up the session that I was using in that particular video, which, by the way, is also popping up right now for you to download. So if you're thebassist.net, it's in the link in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, just click on that link that was just there, and it'll take you to thebassist.net where you can download that exact session that I used to create that loop. All right, and I apologize. I know I just said a second ago, that's all you need is just a computer and Ableton. There's one more peripheral that you're going to need, and that's something like this. It's called an audio interface. This one's made by PreSonus. It's the Studio 2.6. This is just a 2-channel USB interface, so you can see it's got 2 inputs on the front. You can plug in an XLR microphone or a 1/4-inch cable into each one of these. And then it's got 4 outputs on the back and a headphone out. So that's why I like this. Again, it's USB bus powered. You don't have to run power to the unit. It'll just run off of the USB cable and go into your computer. So this is great if you want to put it on your pedal board or something like that. I guess any audio interface would work, but this is the one that I use. So once you've plugged that interface into your computer and you've opened up the Ableton session that you just downloaded, we're all good to go. So let me show you how to set it up. Check this out. Okay, so at this point, we just need to set up the session for your computer. And here's how we'll do it. Navigate your mouse up into the left-hand corner where you see the word Live, and then click on Preferences. Now on a Windows computer, I'm pretty sure this is found in the File menu. But either way, you'll find it in that upper left-hand corner somewhere. And then from there, just click on this Audio tab here on the left, and then look for these 2 drop-down menus labeled Audio Input Device and Audio Output Device. You'll need to select your interface that you just plugged in for both if you want to use it for inputs and for outputs. And then once you've selected your interface, you just need to set up your I/O routing for the interface that you plugged in. So I recommend creating a mono input for your bass and then a mono output that's going to go to your amplifier like this. Okay, next we need to set our sampling rate to either 44.1 or 48K, whichever you prefer, but there's really no reason to go any higher. Also, be sure to set your buffer size on the higher side, maybe at 512 or 1024 samples. Now, normally a buffer size this high would incur some latency when playing live instruments, but that's not really going to affect us in this case, and I'll explain why. The way that I do this without incurring any latency is by using my effects loop on my bass amp. So basically, I plug my bass into the bass amp, and therefore I'm always monitoring directly from the amp. No digital conversions, no latency whatsoever. Now that signal goes from my amp to this interface where all of the digital looping, and processing happens, and then goes back to the amp via the effects return and then gets blended in to my signal chain. So since I'm monitoring in real time with the amp and the laptop is just basically kicking me playback, there's no need to worry about latency at all. So set that buffer size as high as you want. Now, I do need to say this, that you must have an effects loop that's similar to the one on the DB751, this Aguilar that's behind me, because this effects loop can run in series or parallel. And to be honest, I forget which one it is that you need, but here's what it means. Basically, when I send something from the amp, I can still hear the sound coming from the amp. In other words, I don't plug in the send and then my sound disappears until I plug in the return. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that that's called a parallel effects loop, but I could be totally wrong. So it's one of those. It's either series or it's parallel. And obviously, you don't just need to do it from the amp. If you have like a DI box or an effects pedal or something that has a send and return, an effects loop on it, I imagine that would work as well. And then obviously, you can just monitor straight from Ableton. But again, be careful of that buffer size and make sure your computer is strong enough to handle it. Otherwise, you're going to incur some latency. And then I guess another option would be to own an interface like this one, the PreSonus Studio 2.6, because it's got this button on it that says Mon. And what that does is that allows you to direct monitor straight from the interface. So in other words, it basically acts like a guitar pedal. Your bass goes in and it comes out and goes to the amp. And no matter what you're doing with plugins, no matter where the volume's at on Ableton Live, none of that matters because you're monitoring directly from the unit itself. So that's also an option. Okay, so let's close out of this window and set up our inputs and outputs for this session. We'll start by plugging in a cable to the effects loop send from your amp. And the other end of that cable is going to go in to channel 1 on your interface. And then here in Ableton Live, in this Audio From tab, for each channel of your bass, just select channel 1, since that's where you just plugged your bass in. Next, plug in a cable to the effects loop return on your amp and send the other end of that to the left output channel or channel 1 output on your interface. On most interfaces, the left output is channel 1 and the right output is channel 2. Then come over here to the master output of this Ableton session and select channel 1 or that left channel output, however it's labeled in your I/O routing. And that's pretty much everything you need to get audio from your bass. Now, if you want to, you can plug in some MIDI peripherals as well, so you can control VST instruments or the different looper functions with your hands and feet. So I've got a Keylab 25 for my keyboard sounds, and this Korg pad control over here for the drums. And then I use this Akai APC 40 for all of its mixing features. Now, none of this stuff is necessary, but I just thought it was cool to incorporate. So if you have any MIDI peripherals and you would like to use them, then you just have one additional step to take. Go back to this Preferences menu over here and click on the MIDI tab. Just be sure to enable all of these MIDI controllers and see that they're all showing up. Then just go to the various channels in this session and assign them to a specific MIDI controller. So for instance, my pad control can only control this drum VST right here. I don't have to worry about accidentally hitting piano notes or anything like that, because you can see that VST instrument is only being controlled by the Keylab 25 over here. So now that all of our hardware and software connections are in place, well, we're good to go. Let's start making some music. You can see that I have one labeled for bass line, one for bass chords, one for drums, keys, and then another one for bass melody. So now on each of these channels, I've dragged over an Ableton plugin called Looper. It's a free plugin and it already comes with Ableton Live, so you don't need to buy anything else. And essentially, each one of these channels is now its own looper pedal, each with its own record, play, stop, and overdub functions. So at this point, I can just press record on any of these plugins and the looping begins. And that's pretty much it for this setup. 3 channels of bass, one for groove, one for chords, one for melody, and then 2 channels of VSTs, one for drums and another for keys. Now I do need to say that I'm using some aftermarket drum and keyboard VSTs, so you're not going to have the same ones that I have set up in this video, and that's okay. You can buy those aftermarket or just use the ones that come standard with Ableton Live. But there is one last thing that we need to do before we get going, and that's MIDI mapping our loop control buttons. So click on this MIDI button up here in the right-hand corner, and you'll see that everything on the screen turns purple. And this is really cool. Ableton allows you to assign any of these purple buttons to a hardware button or hardware controller on your MIDI device, if you have one. So if you're using a MIDI foot pedal, well, I can assign the record button of this looper plugin to any button on my foot pedal. So let's just go ahead and choose this one here. And then I'll do the same for each channel. That way I don't have to come over to my laptop and move the mouse around and find this button right here every time I want to record a new loop. So now everything is set up, everything's patched and MIDI mapped, and we're ready to make music. So I'll hit the record button right now and I'll start my groove. And you can see how after 4 bars, the groove starts looping on its own. And now I'll hit the next button to start looping the chord progression. And again, I didn't have to press stop because it's set to follow the starting and stopping length of the first initial loop. And then I can do the same thing for the drum beat if I want, or the keyboard part also. We'll drop in that melody, and we've got a loop that's spread out over many tracks and layers. And again, the reason why I like to do this is because now I can do some mixing and some processing. If the groove is too loud, well, I don't have to worry about re-recording it. I can just pull it down with this fader right here. If the chords are too soft, if I played them too quietly now that everything's all stacked up, well, I can just bring up the volume by doing this. And since everything is going over to this master fader right here on the right, well, now I can add plugins like EQ to morph the sound of everything coming from Ableton. Or I can even place these plugins on specific channels themselves for individual processing. So now I just jam out, have fun, and tweak away. So like I said in the beginning, if you're new to any of this stuff, then I'm positive a lot of it went over your head. Don't worry, there's nothing wrong with you. It's not hard, it's just a lot of new information. So it's understandable that you might have missed some of it. But if I did lose you on some of this stuff, and this is something you're interested in, let me just say this really quick. It's not out yet, but I'm currently editing a series for subscribing members at thebassist.net called DAW Recording 101. So it's basically going to take you through everything you need to know for recording yourself at home, from setting everything up to tracking to editing to mixing. It's just going to be a big complete crash course on making music with a computer. So if that's something that you're interested in, just go check out thebassist.net. It should be there in a couple of weeks. And then obviously, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to leave me a comment below or shoot me an email, and I'll get right back to you just as soon as I can. So as always, thanks again for stopping by, and I'll see you next time here at thebassist.net. Hey, if you like what I do, please click on the subscribe button right here. And if you really like what I do, then click over here to see how affordable it is to join me at thebassist.net. But if you just want the free stuff, then click here to check out whatever YouTube's sophisticated robots think you should watch next. I'm sure they know what's best for you.